Welcome to our webinar on nation building and the CARES Act. As everyone knows, the CARES Act was bringing financial resources into Indian country, not adequately. Of course, it ended up in litigation, but the remainder of the funding is going to be coming, Steve Mnuchin said today, tomorrow or Friday, for tribes to respond to COVID. My name is Karen Diver. I work with the Native Nations Institute. The Native Nations Institute exists to build capable Native nations that can effectively pursue and ultimately realize their own political, economic, and community development initiatives. We teach and research about nation building in Indian country, and we do this through research and policy analysis of governance and development in Indian country, and we do training and development programs as well as academic programs at the University of Arizona. So the 5 principles of nation building are sovereignty, capable governing institutions, cultural match, strategic orientation, and public-spirited leadership. Joining us today, we have Chairman Brian Newland from the Bay Mills Nation. He was formerly the chief judge for his nation, as well as the senior advisor at the Department of Interior during the Obama administration. Also joining us is Councilwoman Herminia Frias, just re-elected last week to her council as at Pasquayaqui Nation, as well as the served as formerly as the chairwoman as well. Thank you both for joining us today. So,
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. In terms of nation building and the CARES Act, so, I mean, all of a sudden, wow, right? You know, all of a sudden we have a huge pandemic. I know that in my own nation, the Fond du Lac, Bannock Lake, Superior, Chippewa, I don't know that we had pandemic planning. We had emergency planning, but never did we really envision something that would be such a huge public health threat at the same time be such a just gut our financial engine, mainly our hospitality industries, and the ripple effect that would have through our government of having to keep people home and quarantined and losing that economic driver as well. We probably could have anticipated the complete lack of timely federal assistance, but you know, when this started, tribes didn't know. Let's start with Chairman Newland. How, as a nation, did you even begin to plan when you first knew that you were going to have to shut down your community, both in terms of government services and your gaming enterprise? What were the first things that went through your mind as a government official?
Well, as you talked about off the top, Karen, with nation building and having goals or planning, we came up with some objectives that we wanted to meet as a council, and we agreed among our elected leadership here that everything we did would have to tie back to those goals with the pandemic. And we started this process before the closure, when it looked like this virus was spreading across the country. And I wrote them behind me on the board. It's hard to see with the glare, but our first goal was everybody in our community survives. I mean, it sounds simple enough, but we said that was our goal. The second was that we were going to protect public health here on our reservation. The third was that we were going to protect our employees, both their medical well-being as well as their financial well-being. And then our last goal was that we were going to protect the tribe's long-term economic health. And so really, once you set up your goals, you set up your destination where you want to go, every decision we made had to flow back to each of those goals. And so we made the decision, before we closed our casino, actually, we set up a leave bank for our employees and allowed salaried government employees to share their leave with at-risk casino employees so that they could leave the workplace while we kept operating. And after 2 weeks we made the decision to close entirely, and then owing to the third goal on that list, we committed to paying the wages and health benefits for our employees for a month. And that was before we knew any federal aid was coming, because what we had agreed or come to an understanding was people can't quarantine effectively if they don't have the ability to take care of their basic needs. And so and we also just kind of resolved that 2020 in terms of business was just going to be a write-off, if you will. And one of our employees here said, 2020 is a year to survive. It's not a year to thrive. And so we kind of put all those together, and that really went into what informed our decision to close.
Councilwoman Frias? What was your nation considering in terms of how to deal with the pandemic and such a blow to your financial stability?
I think, it was just the public safety. I mean, that was just first and foremost. And, the financial stability was a concern, but it was just how do we protect, just everyone, and the financial stability, we'll figure that stuff out. And it was just really trying to think about and channel our ancestors. If they have survived, through other pandemics, we can do it too. So this is just something that that we'll have to figure out. And so it was really a way for us to, first thought were elders. And so the first thing that we did was close our congregate for a senior center. And we had already planned on having an emergency response meeting with, directors that Monday, and over the weekend we had closed the senior center, and just made phone calls to transition, the meals and all of that with the key staff to continue to feed our elders, and started meeting on what we need to do next, and then meeting with everyone on the transition. So it was just how do you move from there? But on the good note was we had already started moving forward on public health preparedness. So we had already started creating the codes, and we had already passed a public health preparedness. We had already passed a public health code. We were already working on an emergency management plan. We had already, started going along that path. So it wasn't, so some of those things were in place. It was, but it's different when you put it in place just as an exercise. It's different when you actually have to execute it. And so, and then just kind of getting our casino to close, because we don't have a lot of different types of economic development. And that really is our bread and butter. And just letting people know that we're just going to have to close down, and we'll close the casino, but also transition into community mode when it came to our government services, because we had to consider that our community needs, and that you can't close down a government when you know that your people depend on certain services. So for me specifically, I have a public health background. I have a master's in public health. And I think, and that is one of the reasons that I went into tribal leadership, is because I see things always through a public health lens. And so it's always about development. And so the first concern as I was tracking COVID was how vulnerable our people were to the virus. And knowing the number of people that had diabetes, knowing how many elders we had, knowing that it was a respiratory virus, knowing the people that had asthma, knowing how many people had cancer, just knowing our community, it was, we've got to shut it down. And so it was just, we need to act quick, and we just got to mobilize our resources. And I'm so proud of how the community responded and worked with each other.
Your public health background must have come in handy in terms of informing your government in terms of immediate response, but also that you had that existing code. When we talk about those capable governing institutions, you had those building blocks in place, plus you had the practical knowledge in your leadership as well.
It was helpful. It was definitely helpful because the health department had already been working on that component, but I think it was more helpful working with a council and really articulating that to the council on how important it was for us to act immediately, and also with casino and people there, and community, and just breaking it down on what this means, and just the urgency, and just, you know, not complicating things, and just, I think that's really important, is how you message things without making it into a panic, but how important it is for us to really take care of ourselves and each other. So I think that was one of the reasons. And we haven't, you know, the state of Arizona has, you know, lifted their opened up the state, and did not. We haven't. You know, we never did. And you know, we continue to have curfew. We continue to be. We did open the casino, but we still have. We're still hypervigilant about the virus and about what we're doing. We have the government open, but we continue to monitor it. It's not. We had to transition, and I keep saying, things are not going to go back to normal. Normal doesn't exist. It's a new normal. We have to think different. If we have to learn from this experience, if we don't learn, it was a waste. You have to learn something from this and do things different.
Chairman Newland, so it was interesting to me that Pasquayaki actually did some planning previously and had some code put into place. Did your nation benefit from any of that prior work in terms of governmental response and preparedness, or did you have to learn on the fly and start as you saw things progressing?
We were actually in the process of putting together an emergency response plan when the pandemic hit, and I had some practice in my brief time on in my position. I've only served for 3.5 years, or 2.5 years now, and in that time we had one of our tribal apartment buildings burned to the ground, and then we had a really bad blizzard and power outage reservation wide between Christmas and New Year's just this past year. And we were trying to revamp our emergency planning or emergency preparedness plan, and then the pandemic hit. So we didn't have any of that stuff in place or finalized when this hit, but we did have some practice in responding to emergencies. And you know, to Councilwoman's point, we knew from those times is that you have to act quickly. In an emergency, there's no time to deliberate. Within our tribal government, the chairperson doesn't have unilateral executive decision-making authority, and so our council set up a process where we could make decisions quickly. And even actually delegated those emergency powers to the chairperson, which is a position I occupy right now, because we knew we had to make decisions on an hour-by-hour basis. And to your point, Minnie, this is going to be a learning experience because coming out of this, you know, I don't like to use the term new normal. I like to what we've talked about is making ourselves better because we're armed with all kinds of new knowledge and experience, and to build a better process here for decision making. And we've already started to work on a lot of those ordinances based on what we've learned in the last 3 months.
So the CARES Act money that's coming out from the federal government, Chairman, it's got a lot of strings on it. You know, the original hope was that it would function much like the PPP, the Payroll Protection Act, and kind of offset some of that lost revenue from our casinos. And, you know, as Treasury came out with guidance and continues to refine how they want you to use it, it's not really for longitudinal change within the community, and the capable government piece of nation building is going to be real key in terms of record keeping and how tribes interact with Treasury around whether or not the money is used appropriately, or else they can be in tough shape. Is your tribe worried about that? How are they prioritizing decision making in terms of how they use the CARES Act funding? And then, you know, our tribal citizens also have opinions about that as well, right?
Well, Karen, we could probably do a 2-hour webinar on just the problems with the CARES Act funding. I think the distribution, the way so first, Treasury is continuing to violate the law by every day they don't distribute this money because they had 30 days to do it. And we actually did not get nearly the amount we were expecting. Our tribe got $2.7 million, which is enough to cover about 8 to 9 weeks of payroll here at the tribe. So we tried to say, what can we do with $2.7 million in the short term and put it to use? In our effort to get better, one of the things that we learned is that we are, in fact, capable of doing a lot of our government work remotely, and that coming out of the pandemic, you know, over the next 18 months, we could have waves of coronavirus outbreak. And so childcare is going to be an issue. Schools may close. So we invested a lot of money right off the top in IT, saying we are going to have employees who are uncomfortable coming to the workplace because they feel at risk, or who are uncomfortable sending their kids to school, and so are going to want to stay home. And you know, so we upgraded our IT system, purchased a lot of hardware to facilitate remote work, and put in place a remote work policy across the tribe that took that decision out of supervisors' hands and simply said, if you are in a position that is capable of working remotely, you can choose to do that. We've also said, we looked around our community and said, where do people meet and congregate in large numbers? And we've invested in basically making operations touchless, automatic doors, automatic faucets, automatic sinks, automatic lights. In our casino, we've dedicated a lot of funding to tear out our buffet at the casino and try to replace it with something else for sanitary purposes. And we really broke down our expenditures kind of by phase with the CARES Act money. We put in place a phased response plan based on what they did in New Zealand, because they've been very successful in their coronavirus response. And I think that's important. Just a side note, a lot of times as tribes, we get in this rut that we have to mimic states or mimic federal agencies. And what we said is, we're not doing so great at COVID response here in America. Let's look around the world to where people are having success. And we borrowed a lot of stuff from other countries. And so we put this phased approach and tried to dedicate a portion of money to each phase. And we also know that we're reopening our casino tomorrow, but we don't know what it's going to be like here in the fall time. And we didn't want to give in to demands to just divide it up into equal amounts and send it out to tribal members. We wanted it to be invested in something that will keep our community safe. And so we set aside a good chunk of our CARES Act money for expenditure in the fourth quarter of the year, when heating bills are going to go up, the holidays are coming around, school's back in place, and people are gathering indoors. Because if there's a second wave that hits in the fall time, we wanted to have resources to pay people a portion of their wages, cover their health insurance, help cover their rent or their utilities, so that we weren't caught flat-footed like we were the first time.
Councilwoman, how is your tribe faring in prioritizing CARES Act funding, given all of the restrictions that have been put on it?
Well, from the minute, we started transitioning into protecting our community, we started, spending our own money and just started creating a certain fund basically in our accounting that was COVID, because we knew that we were going to bill Congress or bill the feds before we knew, we're like, we're going to bill them, so before the bill was even passed, we knew that we've got to make sure that we mark everything that we spend COVID. So because we couldn't wait for them to figure it out. And so everything that we did, because we were already delivering food boxes, we were already, creating our incident command system, we were already, sending people home, everything was already in action before Congress was getting their stuff together. And so, but but everything was accounted for. So once we got the money, we started, we had all these big ideas, and I had all these big ideas, and now I'm getting like, well, that may not be allowable, and that may not be allowable. So it's kind of like, and so it's very frustrating. But one of the things, though, that is even more frustrating for us is that we're a little bit backwards, because we haven't, from the very beginning, we didn't have access to test like most people, right? And so, so it looked as if, we don't, like nobody's testing positive. And so in the first, 2 months, 3 months, we had 2 positive cases. And so now we're in Arizona, it's hot, we're 107 degrees, and this is supposed to be like, it's going to go away. And then in the fall, we're going to have the second wave. But now, and then so we opened up, now we're now seeing our positive cases go up. So we waited to open up. We were closed for, like 10 weeks. We start opening up because we think it's safe. And now we're starting to see the positive cases. Why? Because now we have access to test. And so now it's backwards, and now in Arizona, the governor opened up, and now we're seeing that the hospitals are starting to max out. And so now we've got to take a different look at what is really going on, because what we thought was, a safe environment because nobody was testing positive. Was it because, we were being so proactive, or it was just a lack of testing because we didn't have that access to test? We were testing because we were testing our employees mostly and people that were coming in, but not a lot of people because most people were staying at home. Now we have more tests, we're testing, and we need more tests. So it's still an issue to get testing. And being a government and we have about 800 employees here. We have 1,600 employees in the casino. When you start testing people and you test one person and you start doing the contact testing, the contact tracing, it can immobilize a whole department. you know, it has this domino effect. So, you know, I know your question was around, you know, what can you do? It's, we created all of the, you know, the incident response. We did all of this stuff, and now we're working on, you know, all these other things that we have to do in the community that is going to protect us from the second wave. And now I feel like we're already in it, because the first part, we didn't even have access to testing, and we were kind of like, okay, this is okay. We only have, well, you know, we don't have that many positive cases. Unfortunately, we had 2 people die. We have communities off the reservation. Now we're starting to see that spike, and now we're starting to be really, really worried. It's not looking good, and it's not looking good at all in Arizona for anybody.
One of the things that this really kind of highlights to me is when we talk about nation building and exerting sovereignty and building capable institutions, you guys are showing perfect examples of home rule and taking that seriously. But it also highlights really the kind of, in some ways, the fallacy of the treaty and trust responsibility of the federal government, and the fact that while we've kind of bemoaned that they haven't been there to our liking, this really highlights the necessity of that treaty and trust responsibility, because we're not independent of something that's happening nationally. We require integration into the federal response, whether it's legislative, by not having to beg to be included in the CARES Act, by mobilizing IHS and FEMA, data, things like that. Is any of this informing your government in terms of, and we'll go with Chairman Newland first, and this will be our last question, in terms of your public policy response and how you're, I know there's been different responses at the state level in terms of integration. Some states have been great, some haven't, and we all know the federal government has been fairly hit and miss. So is this informing at all how you're going to go forward in terms of your interactions with federal agencies and or government and state agencies and government in terms of being prepared for that next big thing?
Yes. You know, when I took this job, our tribe has, for a very long time, taken the approach with working with local governments, state agencies, and federal agencies of actually not fighting and trying to go along and build relationships and get along. And that's my orientation personally. But this pandemic has also shown me that when the chips are down, nobody is going to have Indian countries back. And that it's up to us to keep our people safe. And it's really changed my worldview in terms of being more assertive about our prerogative as a sovereign tribal nation and home rule, and looking out for our people. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you know, we have to fight all the time. But being a more forceful advocate for our own prerogative and protecting our needs first. When the pandemic hit, you know, we were delivering meals to school children through our Boys and Girls Club, even outside the reservation, kids who weren't tribal members. We actually instituted, so we started kind of hoarding our purchasing test kits on the open market and hoarding them. And then we instituted community surveillance testing. So we were drawing random samples of people, tribal members and non-tribal members in the area. And then we were sharing that data with local health departments outside the reservation to help them in their decision making, because we said we're not an island. Through our tribal college, we were using 3D printers to manufacture PPE, and we were sharing that with local hospitals and law enforcement agencies. And we offered up our casino hotel to first responders and as a secondary treatment. we were just giving and giving and giving, and we turned around and started. We weren't even asking for direct assistance, in the form of money or anything, but asking for coordination. And we were finding, even here in Michigan, with a Democratic governor who's been hailed as a progressive leader in the country, in local agencies, that people were not willing to reciprocate with us after we were doing so much to help others outside of our borders. So this has really reinforced for me our need to shore up our ability to take care of ourselves for the next emergency, whether it's a forest fire or a flood, because we can't count, no matter how flowery the language is, when times are good and people are getting the revenue sharing checks or other goodies from the tribe. This has shown in a true emergency that we can't count on others. And it's been very frustrating, but also affirming in a way that as a tribe, we have to exercise that sovereignty muscle and make sure that we're in a position to take care of our people.
Thank you, Chairman. Councilwoman?
That is so true. One of the things that that I learned is that tribes are that we're doing it the best. And we had one of our communities of off reservation communities in Guadalupe, which is right in between Tempe, up in the Phoenix area, and they are experiencing a hotspot. And when we realized this, and it's about a lot of people there that are Yaqui enrolled tribal members, and we have a office there, satellite office, and we have a clinic there, but not everybody is enrolled. And we have a town council there, and the town council, the mayor is a Yaqui citizen, and probably the majority of the council there is Yaqui. But when we knew that this was happening, it was a concern. And I called one of the vice mayor, and I asked him, I said, what's going on? What's going on? What's happening? And he shared with me, and I said, how can we help? And I asked him, what did you get, did you get any PPP? And he's like, no. And I was like, what happened there? And he's like, we're too small. We didn't get any. And I said, where's the county? Where's the state? What's going on? And I said, we're meeting with the council tomorrow. I said, let's get you guys in this meeting. Let's figure out how we can help, because we've got to do something, because, this is something that we've got to address. We can bring in our person at the state level, our lobbyists at the state level, our lobbyists at the federal level. We can bring in, we've got to do something, because this virus is not going to discriminate between who's Yaqui and who's not. It's going to affect the whole community. So let's do something. And he's like, yeah, let's do it. We met that day. The next morning we met, and we had everybody on the phone. We had a Zoom meeting, and we had all the right people there. And that started the ball rolling to make sure that the county was aware of what was happening, the state was aware of what was happening, the feds were aware of what was happening. And it was just that conversation that was then having everyone know that there was a hotspot there. But having that conversation with the county and the state and asking, they were like, well, you just have to do testing. They don't have access to testing. Where is their funding? Where is this? Asking all of these questions. And even if they test, where are you going to quarantine? Where are you going to put them? What hotels are you going to put them in? How are you going to provide food? How are you going to make sure they're taken care of? How are you going to, all of these questions? And their response was, well, we don't do that. We refer somebody out to do that. Or we don't do that. Because with the county and the state and all of these other resources, they're all referral resources. And that's where I just realized that they're not tribal communities. So they don't see it the same way we see it. Because, and this was the conversation we had as tribal council, because when we knew COVID was here, this was a community issue and this was going to affect our families. This was going to affect our tribe. We had to do something. And when the state or another governing authority sees this, it's a political issue. It's, you know, kind of like there's degrees of separation. With tribal communities, there are no degrees of separation. It affects us directly. So when we were working with the town of Guadalupe, we're like, no, it was just, I saw the difference of working and you know, knowing that most of the people that sit on that town council, and it's a small community, that they understood that, you know, but working with county and working with state, they just didn't understand that because they don't operate that way. And so I realized that it's tribal nations that get it. And that's why we're quick to respond, quick to mobilize resources, quick to not wait and say, who's going to pay for this? You know, but just say, hey, how do we get this done? And figure out the logistics later, you know, but just let's do it. It was just unbelievable, but it's just what we do. We take care of each other.
Thank you both. I mean, you've really highlighted that those nation building principles are really key to emergency management planning, to record keeping, to understanding our constituencies in a different way, and having the importance of taking care of our own people being the primary driver of decision making, and the rest of those issues in many ways they're supporting issues, but they're also secondary. They're a base, right? Primary is taking care of our people, and you know, we don't see that really happening right now in the broader community around these arguments around economy versus health, right? We're always going to choose health, and that's reflective of who we are. That's that cultural match. But also really in terms of intergovernmental affairs and understanding that our sovereignty, you know, we need to beef up our intergovernmental affairs, hold those people around us accountable for our joint citizens, because we share these citizens with these other jurisdictions, but they don't always feel that they own our citizens the duty of care that they do off reservation. And I think some of these things that have happened recently have highlighted just how important that is, because that's going to be the quickest and the fastest rather than waiting for the feds who tend to take some of that big brother approach. Do you have any final comments before we wrap this up, Councilwoman Frias? Thank you so much for sharing. Anything else you'd like to let us know before we wrap up?
Well, I appreciate the time to talk about this. And I think we have a lot to continue to learn. And like I said, you know, here it's just, I feel like we're just starting, you know, and it is unfortunate because we're just starting to see the peak. And, but, you know, I think it's, you know, we always have to stay hopeful and know that it's going to be a huge lessons learned for us. And it's going to be, you know, how we are going to see how we have taken care of each other. And so, you know, we have to really go back to our core values and who we are and what is really important. And also look at different ways to diversify our economy, you know, and I think for us, that's a big lesson. You know, how do you continue to diversify your economy and not put everything into to one basket, and you know, think bigger and think long range, and think about, you know, not you know, think about the health of your community rather than the dollar all the time. You know, it's, you really have to invest in the people.
Thank you. Chairman Newland, any final thoughts?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier in the discussion, Karen, about a social contract. That's a part that I think a lot of times we elected leaders ignore because you're trying to manage the fire of the day. In an emergency like we're in right now with the pandemic, people are scared and they're uncertain. They don't know. They're trying to get through the day alive, and people need to know that the people they've entrusted with responsibilities are actually caring about them and fulfilling our, us, we're fulfilling our end of the social contract. And what we tried to do is every single day we shared an update with our tribal citizens. And at the beginning of our quarantine, it was several times a day about exactly what's going on, exactly what we know, and exactly what we don't know, and the thinking that is going into everything that we're doing, and fielding questions, large and small, and, right down to what are the hours of the tribal grocery store, and responding to rumors quickly so that we're stamping out misinformation and making sure that we are engendering that trust that we might not get it right, but here's what we're trying to accomplish, and just being there. And that has gone, at least here, has gone a long way because it allowed us as leaders. Then we didn't have to focus on internal office politics or tribal politics or anything like that. It was just communication and responsiveness, because as you were saying, Minnie, we're a tribal people, and we have to look out for one another, and it was important for us to maintain that communication, maintain that trust, so that we were not demanding obedience. We were empowering our own people to play their role in this pandemic to keep our people alive. So that was something that was reinforced for us, that I'd encourage other people to remember. If you're on tribal council, always be communicating. Always.
Well, thank you both for your public service to your communities. Leadership is sometimes tough, and then you add all of these things in, and it can be a challenge. So, thank you for stepping up, serving your community, trying to keep them safe. And we look forward to talking to more of you around lessons learned so we can be better prepared the next time. Thank you, Chairman Newland. Thank you, Councilwoman Frias, for your time. And we'll send you some fine Minnesota wild rice for your efforts.
You
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.